Good morning, grade 6 IS. Welcome to your very first class where we are learning from home with the flipped classroom. Our IS. We spent some time in class today talking about how we need to be seekers of truth, what that looks like, how things often get distorted and twisted, and how do we decipher between what seems to be two lies or partial truths. How do we get to what we want to know? So today, for our lesson, just want to review again why we bother with truth. Why do we actually care? Like, what's the point? If tomorrow doesn't matter, if it's right or wrong, I guess I would argue against that and say it is. Truth is very important because as we continue on in history, we're passing on stories, we're passing on um, a message, we're passing on so many things that if caught to be false or found to be false, an entire generation, a person like you, would be misled to think something that's false. God commands us to be seekers of truth, to stake our claim onto what is right, to be rooted on a strong foundation, building our house upon what is true, whatever is right, and loving such things. I hate being lied to because somebody intentionally tried to mislead me. Now, for you in class, you don't have the option. You are going to be establishing strong arguments and you are going to be giving your evidence for why your argument or your evidence or your what you have found is true. And so the time for just simple Google searches is behind you. Now we dig for truth. And so throughout the next few lessons, we're going to be looking at how do we find truth? How do we dig for truth? What does it look like? And we'll be reviewing some things from last year. This will be a continuation, so we'll look at a couple of things here and there. Today it's going to be a little bit shorter. I'm sure you're glad to hear that. But once we get to different stages of this lesson, of this unit, we'll be able to apply them all together and actually be able to decipher, take some big questions from the world that lots of people have been trying to answer and say, this is what we do know. And from that, we base our ideologies, we base our worldviews off of what we have found to be true and not what somebody else is telling us. They might be right, they might be wrong. So, I want you to think about truth and I want you to think about the movies. So often in TV shows you see these crime fighting shows and they are looking for a clue or something like that to lead them to the accused, to lead them to someone who has done the crime. And so often they're taking fingerprints, they're doing all these things. I want you to think about these movies. Oh yeah, I'm tired thinking about these movies and all these different things that they use to identify. And so often they have to make the story entertaining. So they have all this evidence that leads towards one person, and then there's one thing that points them away. And so they have to recalculate, they have to redo all of their detecting to get to who actually did it. And so truth matters, and truth in our world is very important. So, with that said, I want to review with you some of the things we talked about last year, and if maybe you missed that session during transition time. Through the IB, we teach theory of knowledge, and this class is based off of this idea of truth and establishing worldview and vision and morals and ethics for ourselves that are based off of knowledge, off of truth and what we do know. And so the theory of knowledge establishes what they call to be the ways of knowing. And this is all IB stuff, and this isn't Mr. Chris making it up. And so the first one is language. We know things through language, right? I ask you what a lion is, right? You describe for me what a lion is, and I can tell if the animal in the cage is a lion or a tiger or a rhinoceros, right? Language describes for us, and we can use language to know what we're talking about. If someone is describing their experience, I'm learning about it. I know what they experienced through the language. I wasn't actually there, but they describe it in a book. Sense and perception. This one is things that we often associate with science, right? Things that can be proven, right? The I can smell it, I can taste it, I know it's there because I can see with my eyes, I can hear it with my ears. Those kinds of five senses, those things fall into the sensual perception, and these things we know are true, right? If you see somebody fall into the pool with your eyes, right, or if you feel the water is wet when you go into the fall into the pool, you're like, oh, I know that I'm in the pool, right? I can feel it, I can see, I can touch it. I know that person went in because I saw them. Sometimes we need things, and some of these are a little bit different compared to the others, but emotion, right? You know that Bambi's a sad movie, right? No one had to tell you. You're watching it and like, oh, it's sad, right? There's this emotional response, and so we can't just neglect that and say, you know what, that's not true, even though you're starting to cry. It's not a sad movie. Well, there is a way for us to know, and there's no scientific method to figure out what's sad and what's not. The next one is reason, logic. One of the ones I like to use is from the Narnia movie, showing the clip of Lucy and her siblings talking about how she had gone there. Edmund went to Narnia with her, and the professor's sitting there. Oh, it's logical, right? She is the one who normally tells the truth. And so, through a stance that isn't typically normal, we can get to a conclusion based off of logic and reason. And so, imagination, coming up with new things, right? We know there's computers, right? We can see it. Somebody thought this up, right? And now it's there. We are gaining more knowledge as we discover this world. And so another one is this is faith through religion, through putting our hope and our trust that there's a deity over the world, and we know that the order and the creation speaks to it. Intuition and memory, all these things, they flow into how do we know something. And so when someone says to you um, about maybe how do you know a tree is green, right? You can go to these things and say, you know how I know, and I know that I know this is I can see it, right? I can see it with my eyes. Or how did you know you were looking at a a Sasquatch? I don't know. It's something that nobody's ever really seen. Maybe they have, right? You go to the language. This is the description of a Sasquatch, and this is it. So this is the beginning of it. How we get to this, how do we get this theory of knowledge, and why is it important? Well, as historians and as people who are now joining individuals and societies and doing ancient history these next few quarters, we need to make sure we are not inventing. Okay, we can't invent the past. We can't invent ideas for the people in the past. We can't invent their motives. We can't invent anything like that because we're not them. And we don't want to be them. We want to learn from them. We want to see what they knew and what they did and apply that to today and to our governments and things like that. But we don't invent. And so this is where you get rid of all of your Wikipedia searches because we need to challenge everything. Okay, challenging the authority. We need to challenge the past experience. Like until we have hard evidence and facts that something is true, right? And there is a way of knowing there is, and we'll get to these primary sources that prove this stance, then we can believe it. But as historians, we do not want to just place everything on assumptions or on theories. We need evidence, okay? We need primary sources to begin to make conclusions. We don't want to invent. We don't want to pretend like we know better than them. Um, so we want to keep bias out of our work, but how do we do this, and how do we do this effectively as students, especially in grade 6, you'll become very familiar, is we use two sources, okay? Primary sources and primary source documents and secondary source documents. When we are studying a criminal case, right, they want to know who did the crime, they're going to go to things that are irrefutable. They go and they ask everybody who was in the area of the bank robbery, what did you see, right? What happened? Were there any noises? All these kinds of things. Then they get fingerprints, they get videos, right? They try to recreate what happened to the best of their ability with all that they have possible, and from that make a conclusion. So they do this by using primary sources and I'm a little hesitant to say secondary sources, but they are um, in in the study of history important because so often our primary sources are not there. So these are very important. Primary sources are sources that are um, almost irrefutable. Okay, they are things you go to find out what you want to find out. They are things like video clips, right? If I want to see someone who has cheated on a test, and I put up a surveillance camera and I can see them having their notes, right? That's my primary source to giving you a detention for cheating on your test. Okay, that's how I know that you cheated. Okay, so there's archives and manuscript materials. These are things that are put away through different um, groups, through ancient history, through today. There's manuscripts of every government meeting, of every um, judge judge's courthouse, those kinds of things. There's photographs, auto recordings, your video calls, these kinds of things. These are primary sources. Journals. If I'm writing a journal every day as a teacher, right? If you want to find out what day we won the basketball game, you go to Mr. Chris's journal. You can see, oh, on January 14th, right? We played Esteja and some other place and we won. Letters, diaries, speeches that were given. Martin Luther King Jr., right? Abraham Lincoln. We know what they said through the speeches. Scrapbooks, filled with pictures, published books, newspapers, if they have primary sources involved, as in eyewitnesses, um, photos of the crash of the ship sailing off, those kinds of things. Government publications, military documents are incredible sources, especially as we will move into the world wars and things like that. There is incredible details kept and preserved through military documents, through oral history being passed down from one person to the next. Records, maps are primary. So if somebody said they sailed east, right, but they ended up getting to let's see, Sumatra, right? They did not sail east; they sailed west. The maps are our primary source. So if you claim something that isn't true, we can go to the map and say no. There's artifacts, costumes, printing, research data, public opinions. You can do surveys. Those are primary sources. Next one, secondary sources. So these, I like to describe these as um, they are the person who talked to the person. They are not the best source, but they might be the next best thing, right? If your great grandpa fought in World War II and your grandpa, who you can talk to today, right, saw him, talk to him, or your dad met him and tells you the stories that were passed on to him, your dad would be a secondary source to what your grandpa experienced, not a primary source, whereas your grandpa and your great grandpa might be because they are directly related. So secondary sources are things that we don't really want to use if we don't have to, but they can be. These are bibliographies, life stories about somebody's life through the writing of someone else. Reference books, dictionaries, encyclopedias, atlases, um, magazines, journals, newspapers of these events. These are not people who were there and witnessed the events. They're the ones who are covering. They're the ones who asked the questions. So the newspapers would be secondary sources. Literature reviews, articles, research documents, historical books, works of criticism, commentaries. I don't like to put textbooks in there because I actually don't see very much in there that are secondary sources anymore. It seems to be a lot more um, just somebody writing their opinion of how history happened. Don't like it that much. But we're almost to the end of our time. So I think I'll save this story for when we are in class again, but I want you to think about these primary sources and how you might solve or figure out who this person is or what this person might be. So in class, I'm going to tell you a story about a boy in the canteen wearing pink shoes. That's it. Tell me what you might need or what you know to identify this person. Who is he? So if you want to come to class early and prepared, write down what you know about this person. Very simple facts. You know Espeja. You should be able to make some good assumptions based off of your evidence given. As always, I hope you enjoy. Have a great day. I will see you in class.